A few months ago, I replayed the original Layton trilogy along with some friends so that we could show one of them what Layton was all about. I told them I never actually played the prequel trilogy since word of mouth was that it wasn't really all that good compared to the original trilogy. Well, after we finished the third game, we actually decided to go through the prequel trilogy just to see if the rumors were true. And, well, here I am, making a whole ass video about my thoughts on it. This will be the first of, hopefully, 3 videos analyzing different aspects of the Layton series. Each video will go through all 6 games, but they will only touch on the parts that are relevant to the subject of the video. While I will try to give some context to the things I will be talking about, just in case you haven't played Layton, I won't be doing any plot summaries, so it is recommended for you to go and play the Layton games before you watch these videos. Now, without further ado, let's solve the puzzle that is the Professor Layton series. Okay, I think we should start with the root of all evil, the father of everything that represents patriarchy in the Layton series. Lucky for us, he dies before the first game begins, but the shadow he casts will be felt throughout the whole series. That's right, I'm talking about the founder of Saint Mystere and father of the Golden Apple herself, Augustus Reinhold. His first documented crime happened after his wife, Violet, died. Instead of mourning and supporting his daughter like a normal person, he decided that the best thing to do was to commission the family engineer, Bruno, to build him a robot that's a perfect replica of Violet so that the robot would keep Flora company. Needless to say, Flora hated it. Because what the fuck, dude? In response to this, Augustus asked the engineer to reprogram the robot so that its personality was different from Violet's. And that's how we get Dahlia, who was the one who called Layton to solve the mystery in the first place. But wait, that's not all, because Dahlia isn't the only robot in Saint Mystere. Back when all Augustus was alive, Saint Mystere didn't exist. It was only the Reinhold Manor. Once more, this made Augustus worry about Flora. She would have to stay all alone in the isolated estate after her father died. So what did he do? Naturally, he asked Bruno to build a whole village filled with robots so that Flora wouldn't feel alone. Because spending all your life surrounded by robots that are programmed to love you and throw puzzles at every outsider they meet is extremely healthy and will probably not turn you into a serial killer. And we all know what happens next. Flora gets adopted by Layton and then... Wait, hold on. Did I say adopted? Sorry, my mistake. What I meant to say was engaged. I actually got this bit of info from the wiki, so take this info with a grain of salt. But apparently, in the Japanese version of the game, Augustus mentions in his letter to Layton that Flora is of marriageable age, and that whoever solved the mystery of the Golden Apple was to become Flora's suitor. Good old Augustus, making sure her daughter had no agency even after death. Well, adopted or engaged, Flora joins the main cast. However, there is a small problem. Level 5 does not want Flora to be part of the main cast. They just wrote it that way because they wanted to give us that warm emotional ending for the first game. How do they deal with this problem? They don't, really. Before the prequel trilogy, Flora becomes this extra baggage that the writing team wants to remove from the story, but can't outright do that, like a parent raising an unwanted child. In Layton 2, they sort of entertain the idea of giving her some sort of character arc.
What are you doing here?
I'm sorry. It's just
Well, you see, I just didn't want to be all alone again.
But this doesn't really become anything. She's barely a character, and the writing team very clearly doesn't know what to do with her, aside from having her point out anything she finds cute. But even that tiny morsel of characterization wasn't fully granted to her, because more than half of her appearance in Layton 2 gets retroactively removed when it is revealed that she was replaced by an imposter less than halfway through the game. By Layton 3, the writing team was sick of Flora, and their relationship with her becomes openly antagonistic. A big portion of her appearances are about how Layton and Luke really wish that she wasn't there. The other side of Flora that we see is honestly more charming. Despite being there through most of the game, Flora actively refuses to engage with the story, acting aloof and carefree. While I think this is a funny joke and a potentially good character trait, I can't bring myself to say this portrayal of her was done in good faith. If this aspect of Flora existed in a vacuum, I would more willingly accept it. But we also have to include her naggy aspect from the earlier segments. Put together, it makes Flora end up reading like the annoying lady that won't leave Layton alone, and is too dumb to understand the mystery. But hey, she does get to do a few puzzles in this game, so I call that a win for feminism. There aren't any more big displays of misogyny or patriarchy in the first three games. Sure, every important female character we meet is the exact same conventionally pretty girl with little to no personality, and their only importance to the plot is that they are the object of desire of an important male character. But really, what's new here that you haven't seen in like 90% of fiction written by men? If this video was only about the original trilogy, my argument wouldn't really have anything worthy of note. Oh, but don't you worry, because the prequel trilogy will more than make up for that. The Last Spectre begins by introducing us to the new main character, Emi Altaba. Honestly, there isn't anything particularly sexist about Emi at all. I just thought that the timing of her introduction was interesting. I have a theory that Emi was made as a response to people complaining about Flora's mistreatment. I imagine the meeting going like, well guys, it seems people didn't like what we did with Flora, so we need a new heroine for the series. We won't make the same mistakes as before. She's gonna have a lot of screen time and she's gonna be proactive and she's gonna solve a bunch of puzzles and she's gonna ride a cool bike and kick the shit out of bad guys with martial arts. It's gonna be awesome. And you know what? Fair enough. Nothing wrong with having a badass archetype. I just find it very funny how much they are overcompensating for Flora. What else is worth mentioning? We got Emmy, we got the usual pretty girl. Oh, that's right. We got the biggest act of violence to women in the entire series. They killed Lucia! Monsters! They killed her and then they have the nerve to pretend like the ending was a happy ending. Worst game in the series, 0 out of 10. You can't see this, but I'm rubbing my hands together like a little fly right now. We finally got to the real meat of the video. This is where things just become completely bonkers insane. It wouldn't be an overstatement to say that these last two games alone were the reason I decided to make this video.
Professor, look at that clown!
Miracle fucking Mask. Man, I remember when we first got to the young Layton flashback. I remember when we met Randall. He was Layton's best friend back then. Yeah, he had a girlfriend and all. We knew it was all queerbaiting. Pure and distilled queerbaiting. Delicious queerbaiting. We got a taste of heaven for like 5 whole minutes. Then we truly met Randall. Randall is the most self-centered asshole you've met. He's the son of a rich guy. He wants to become a famous archaeologist. He only cares about his own interests. He completely ignores anything his girlfriend says, and he never cares about her wants or needs. He ropes Layton into this deadly adventure he wants no part of.
You promised Angela we weren't going to do anything dangerous.
I know what I said, Herschel. What about no risk, no glory? This is the chance of a lifetime. And we must seize this opportunity while we have it.
Randall, this is...
I'm not interested in talking anymore. I've worked so hard for this. You can go back home if you must. But Herschel, I'd rather you were there.
All right, Randall. Let's go.
He gives him a shovel to force him to do all the dirty work, literally. Then he turns into a villain and writes a bunch of poems about how he got cut, and they're super cringe, and he sucks, and he's the worst, and I hate him. What does that have anything to do with the sexism in the Layton series? Well, there's probably something in there, but for the most part I just needed to get that out of my system and couldn't find a better place to do it. Back to the main subject. Let's talk about Angela. She is, as always, a prop that's there to serve a male character. This time it's Randall, and it really doesn't get any deeper than that. But while I was skimming through the game again, I saw this cutscene.
Randall seems to be quite single-minded lately.
Yeah, that's Randall. I think his enthusiasm is one of the reasons I admire him.
I suppose.
But that passion makes him easily excitable. You know, you're very good for him. You keep him balanced.
Is balanced the same as boring?
No. Randall's lucky. We're both looking out for him.
Yes, he is lucky, isn't he? He's got a kind girlfriend who's concerned about his well-being, and a loyal best friend.
Ah,
This scene makes me want to rip out my hair. It's there. It's all there. It almost reads like the game is riffing on itself. Layton and Angela talk about how self-centered Randall is. Then Layton straight up says what Angela's role in the story is. She's a prop made to support Randall and nothing else. Then Angela becomes aware of this and laments being a prop, calling herself boring and wishing to be more. But then Layton brings her back to reality by saying that it's actually good to be a prop and that everybody has their role to fill and they're all equally important. And finally, Angela accepts her role in the world and decides to cope. I hate this cutscene because it gave me hope. It really made me think that Angela was going to be a much more fleshed out character. But if my tone doesn't make it super obvious, that's not how things went. About 2/3 into Miracle Mask, we learned that Henry is actually completely devoted to Randall, and he actually was preparing a big return party for him. By that time, me and my friends were feeling really cynical about the way Level 5 writes women. And we were making jokes about what could be the worst thing that could happen. Stuff like, haha, what if Henry and Angela are distant because they're not actually married? Haha, what if Henry just fake married Angela to keep her chaste and pure and protected from other suitors until Randall returned? Wouldn't that be funny? And guess what?
Randall, my marriage to Henry wasn't real.
What?
It was pretty funny.
I'll never forget it. He said, "Will you wait for Master Randall with me?" Henry always believed you would come back. He helped me believe too. So we agreed to pretend to be married until the day you returned, Randall. Henry vowed that he would protect and preserve everything of yours.
Henry never took anything from you. He protected everything for you.
What?
One of the more damning statements with this reveal is that Henry specifically arranged the fake marriage so that Angela wasn't forced to marry their other childhood acquaintance, Dalston. Why would this even be suggested? None of the backstory has indicated that Angela is in a situation where she would be forced into marriage. Well, if you, like me and my friends, have been paying attention, you might have started catching some patterns in the way Level 5 writes. And you may have arrived at the answer already. She would marry Dalston because she is a woman, and women get married when they grow up. And Dalston has shown some interest in Angela, which makes Angela's opinion on the matter irrelevant. Also, completely missing the point, but honestly she would have been better off marrying Dalston. After all is said and done, we do get our queer rating ending anyways. Except it's with Henry and Randall instead of Layton and Randall. Layton, seeing how fucked up the whole situation is, makes the right call and leaves town before Randall has a chance of asking him to be his friend again. Good on you, Layton. We've finally reached the final game of the series, and what a ride it's been. By this point, me and my friends were terrified of what would happen to Emmy on this game. Since we knew she isn't on the original trilogy, as we saw it, there were two possible outcomes. She was either going to die, or worse, get married off to someone. And seeing as how this game introduces a new main character, sorta, it just made the latter much more realistic. Thankfully, our fears were unfounded this time. If you're already feeling pretty drained by what happened on Layton 5, let me assure you, it doesn't get any worse. That is, unless we start reading in between the lines. Layton 5's treatment of women may have been infuriating, but whatever the hell Layton 6 does just fills me with this icky feeling. First, let's inspect what's on the surface. Now, it would be remiss of me not to mention the homoerotic tones in Layton 6, given how much attention I gave them in Layton 5, so I'll go ahead and do that. As you might already know, one of the prequel trilogy's most notable features is the addition of a new recurring antagonist, Descole. He's been around since Layton 4, and I'm sure the fandom was filled with people shipping them all the way back then. But the true stuff comes until we see him in his fake persona during Layton 6. His name is Desmond Sycamore, and he's the most dad character since Layton himself. The interactions between Layton and Sycamore are... I can only describe them as two dads talking about cars and grilling. They're both extremely in sync with each other, and it's kind of fun to watch. Now, before you get excited, Layton and Sycamore slash Descole are actually blood brothers. That was obviously done for shock value reasons, but it's much more fun to imagine that it was Level 5's countermeasure against Layton Sycamore shippers. Going back to women, we have Aurora. Aurora is a golem made by an ancient civilization to judge humanity. She has amnesia at first, so the story is set up so that her arc is that she's a naive character that is learning about humanity. It's a very old trope, but it's a very satisfying one. Not for this character, I mean in general. The whole arc doesn't really amount to much. She asks a few questions about some aspects of civilization, but doesn't really share any of her own opinions on the matter. And when she reaches the end of her emotional arc, it just means that she went from a blank, emotionless slate to the bland, pretty girl archetype we've been grown accustomed to. I'd say I was disappointed by this, but I honestly didn't have my hopes up, since we're already 6 games in, and I've seen what they did with Angela. Before we move on, I just want to make a quick parenthesis. Sometimes, when you're exploring areas in the game, there'll be these bits of food. When you interact with them, all you will hear is a biting noise and the food disappearing. This was not in any of the previous games, so my headcanon is that Aurora is experiencing civilization through her taste buds.
I enjoyed that.
Okay, that's the end of the parenthesis. Okay, so I mentioned that Emmy didn't die, nor did she get married. But what did happen to her? During the last bit of the story, she reveals to be a spy for the bad guys, who was just keeping a close eye on Layton all along. This explains why she's good at fighting. After the big confrontation with the enemy, she later on comes to regret betraying Layton and Luke, and decides to make amends for her actions. So she decides to quit being Layton's assistant to go on a journey of self-introspection, which explains why she isn't in the original trilogy. It's honestly kind of a cool twist. They could have definitely done a lot more with it, but it's fine. And that's all the important women in Layton 6. Not a bad show for level 5 this time. We got through the whole game mostly unscathed. But if you're a person living in the real world, if you're a person that knows about the ugliness that lies beneath the squeaky clean white surface, you might have noticed something else. For this next part, I'm gonna be delving into wild speculation theory. So as mentioned above, take it all with a grain of salt. Also, while the game itself does not contain any inappropriate or suggestive content, I will be mentioning stuff that might be upsetting to some people, So I'm gonna go ahead and put a content warning here just in case. Okay, let's stop talking about the Layton games for a second and try to imagine a little scenario in our heads. Ready? There is a village. In this village, a natural occurrence is attributed to a deity, which in turn forms a religion. One of the most prominent figures in this village is a priest, a middle-aged man. When the natural occurrence becomes a problem for the village, for example, a drought, a deluge, harsh winds, it is customary for the deity in charge to be appeased by way of human sacrifice. The sacrifice is always a young woman who is of marrying age. The sacrificial ritual happens in a place hidden so that nobody can see it happen. After the ritual is complete, all that is left behind are the woman's clothes. That's it. That's the scenario I want you to imagine. Now, I want you to be completely honest with me. Did this scenario evoke any images that were not explicitly mentioned in the text? Did you have any additional thoughts while hearing this? I did. I assumed that the priest was using the ritual as an excuse to take advantage of the women. What is my point here? My point is that this scenario is from the game. While you are searching for clues, a big portion of the game is spent going around the world and visiting different towns and villages from different cultures. This is one of them. Of course, this game is for children, so obviously, this is not what was truly happening. The women were not actually dying. They were actually being taken away from the village so that they could continue living safely. The priest was completely unaware of what was going on and legitimately thought that sacrifices were happening, and their natural occurrence, which turned out to be very harsh winds, were actually caused by an ancient artifact that Layton and company were looking for. So the worst case scenario didn't come to pass. But, I don't know, just the fact that the writers put in a scenario that could so easily be read that way is... I don't like it. You could say that it's my fault for reading it that way, since a child would not think of these things. But I think that putting something that comes so close to real life and treating it in such a whimsical manner is pretty tone deaf and disingenuous. Also, even though it's not as messed up as I imagine, it's still pretty messed up that women are just being used as sacrifices and people in the village just accept it. Or they are all in on the trick, which still makes it pretty fucking weird. And that's it for all the sexism in the Layton trilogies. But we're still not done, because I did some peer reviewing with my friends, the ones I've been mentioning throughout the whole video, and they were kicking and screaming about how I didn't include Catriel Layton. The main reason I didn't include her is because I only planned to cover the first 6 Layton games. But there was another reason. Full disclosure, I didn't want to include her because she kinda ruined my narrative of all the important women being badly written. This pushed me to put some, actual effort into doing even the slightest amount of research. And guess what? I'm vindicated. Somewhat. While the director, who is also the main scenario writer, is the same for all the games, the rest of the writing team was changed for the Catriel game. That's enough proof to make the claim that Catriel is an outlier and should not be counted in my conclusion. Now, with a completely clean conscience, we can talk about Catriel. Catriel's game is called, Professor Layton and the... No. Catriel Layton and... No. Lady Layton and... No. Layton's Mystery Journey. Jeez, talk about a forgettable name. Catriel is the protagonist of the game, and she's a pretty good one too. Unlike Layton, who puts gentle manliness above all else when solving a mystery, Cat only cares about being entertained, and will stop an investigation if she loses interest. The usual pattern will be like this. She will at first be enticed by a new case, immediately be distracted by something else, but come back and line up all the dots after everybody assumes she wasn't paying attention. There's also her dynamic with her assistant. He has a crush on her, and she fully exploits this by making him do all the boring parts of her job, which is most of the job. Some people didn't like this aspect of Catriel because it made her a bit of a bitch. But that's kind of the point of the character, and that's what makes her fun. I mean, isn't that what most famous detectives are? Just assholes who solve mysteries for the sake of doing it, rather than for any moral reasons? Look at Sherlock. Look at the other Sherlock. Look at House. Look at Frudo Erica. All household names, all assholes. It's cool. It's fun character writing. Sadly, that's probably the best aspect of the writing, because the story itself is pretty boring. Yeah, I'm sorry too. A big part of the premise of this game is that Layton is Catriel's father, adopted, and he went missing 11 years ago, saying that he had an important mystery to solve, which is the gentleman equivalent of going for cigarettes. No, but seriously, this plotline never gets resolved in the game. You have to watch the anime adaptation of this game to find out what happened to Layton. As mentioned before, Catriel is an adopted child. She was born on a sinking ship, where Luke helped her mother give birth. Her mother died shortly after, but not before telling Luke that her father was currently investigating the hidden relics. Being unable to locate Catriel's father or anybody else in her family, Luke told the story to Layton, who decided to take the baby as his own.
父親の行方がわかるまでは私の子ということにしておこう。
レイトン先生はその子にカトリー・エイルという名前をつけて可愛がった。その後カトリーの本当の父親を探すため先生はレリクスの情報を集めていたのだけど、結局決定的なものは見つからなかった。そして数年が過ぎ、先生はカトリーを身寄りのない子のままにしておくことはできなくて、自分の養子にしたんだよ。それから先生はカトリーを本当の娘として可愛がり、あっという間に10年が過ぎた。
カトリーの帽子だ。
Oh, and I guess this is as good a time as any to mention that Luke has a wife now. She's a mixture between Layton's dead GF and Angela. Moving on. When Kat was 10 years old, Layton got a tip about the hidden relics, and saw this as an opportunity to find out what happened to Kat's biological father, claiming that he was going on an adventure for her sake. And then a bunch of stuff happened. We're not gonna get too much into it because this segment is already pretty long, but long story short, a little after departing for his adventure, Layton and Luke were captured and put into cryostasis for 11 years. This is probably the most controversial thing Layton has ever done. Not getting captured, going on the adventure in the first place. He says he needs to find out who Catriel's quote-unquote real father is, because he needs to know if his relationship to Kat is as strong as being a blood relative. So after he finds out who the biological father is, his bond with Kat will become stronger? The logic is kind of weird, but I guess I can understand what they're going for.
考古学者カイル・エイザーンは存在しない。その謎を追っていたのは考古学者カミラ・エイザーン。彼女だ。
じゃあカトリーの本当の父親は
もうこの世にはいないのかもしれない。
彼女はレイトン先生ならレリクスの謎を解き明かせると考えた。だからカトリーの父親の行方を追わせるという形でレリクスに導いた。
おそらくね。
However, if in order to deepen the bond with your 10-year-old child, you need to abandon that same 10-year-old child during some of the most important years of their life, I think that kind of defeats the purpose of the exercise. Granted, the 11-year cryostasis part was not Layton's fault, but he did go to a very far away place for an indefinite amount of time. He probably wouldn't have left for years, but it's very likely that he would have been away for months. And after doing it once, what's to stop him from doing it again? If you were Layton's kid, that shit would fuck you up good.
私はカトリーと本当の親子になるためにこの謎を解明したいんだ。
本当の親子になるためですか。
もしカトリーの両親がこの世にいないのだとすれば、私はすぐにでも父親になるだろう。 しかしカトリーの出生にはまだ多くの謎が残されている。私はそれを解明し、あの子に伝えたい。その上で私はカトリーの父親になりたいんだ。
I'm sorry. I've gone on such a big tangent on something that is completely unrelated to the subject of the video. But the people deserve to know. They need to know that Layton did a bad parenting. He and Catriel get reunited and he hugs her and cries and apologizes. And my only thought watching this was, yeah, you fucking better.
会いたかった。
私もだ、カトリー。会いたかった。
And now for some bad news. You see, there was supposed to be a segment dedicated to the movie Eternal Diva in this part, but due to several reasons, mostly starting with C and ending with copyright, I wasn't able to put that segment here. So yeah, rest in peace, Eternal Diva segment. Now, if you live outside of the United States or Canada, you are able to see that segment. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna upload a separate video where I put that segment, and then you'll be able to see it. And I guess if you are American or Canadian, you can maybe find some way to bypass the regional lock. I will not go into details, but I feel like you can figure something out there. And since it's not that long of a clip, I might upload it somewhere else, maybe on my Twitter or something like that. We'll see what happens. Okay, let's move on to the conclusion. You know, as I'm going through all of this again, I can't help but think of what could have been. I think of Aurora and how her curiosity of human civilization could have turned into some commentary on how a lot of social conventions hold little to no meaning when seen from an outsider's perspective. I think of Angela and how her time without Randall could have led her into discovering that her true worth as a person doesn't have to be determined by her usefulness to others. But most of all, I think of Flora. Just imagine a child who spent her entire childhood with nobody to interact with aside from robots that are obsessed with puzzles, taken away from her home and exposed to the outside world. What would become of such a child? They could turn into the next Layton, or they could turn into a villain. But that's all just wishful thinking. The truth is, we will never know what happened to Flora. Because even though there is a game that takes place several years after Layton 3, Flora isn't in it, and she isn't mentioned either. But we are familiar enough with the world of Layton that we can make a good guess as to what would become of her. Why, the same thing that happens to all girls. She would grow up like a normal woman, and get married and have children, of course. And she would support her husband and keep him balanced and understand that men sometimes have to listen to the call for adventure, and that when the adventure is over, they will be tired and will want nothing more than to return home and see their wives waiting for them with open arms and a warm meal. Whatever happens aside from that is not worth exploring, and that's fine, because she would be happy. Or at least, that's what level 5 would tell us. And that was the video. Did you like it? If you did, well, cool. I don't have anything else to give you. This is the only video in the whole channel. So I'm planning to do at least one more of these videos, and then we'll see what happens next. Probably nothing. I have some ideas for what comes next, but that requires a lot more setup than what I currently have. If you couldn't tell by the quality of the video, I did this in some very crappy equipment. I don't even have a microphone. I'm using the built-in microphone on my laptop. Anyways, I would maybe link something for donations. I wouldn't link like a patron or anything, but maybe like a Ko-Fi link, but not right now. I'll probably do that later if the video actually gains anything more than 5 views. Well, anyways, that's it. See ya.